What percent of all fresh water is used for crops?
So the total fresh water on the planet is about 2.5% of the total water. The rest is salt and other things.
It's only 2.5%?
It's only about 2.5%, and only about 0.4% of the total water on Earth is the drinkable, usable water, and 90%, roughly, globally, of that is used for agriculture.
Okay, so
we're living on less than 0.5% of the total water on the planet. So Neil, we're worried about getting drinkable water. And in this country, we use drinkable water for our lawns and our laundry and our toilets. The biggest water treatment plant in Southern California pumps trillions of gallons of treated water that's drinkable standards, except it'd probably offend us all, pump it into the sea because it's been treated and because we built our system to be one way. That could probably water all the lawns in Southern California, that could do all the laundry, that could power plants, but we just dump it into the ocean. So before we go doing widgets and gadgets, we might want to look at how we're using what we got.
Okay, so, yeah, that's...
In most of the areas that I'm working in, people are either collecting their water by hand from a nearby resource, or digging a shallow well, or collecting rainwater. And the challenge is that none of those are very reliable. The fact that water comes out of the wall reliably is the key part. And so most of my work has to do with agricultural water use, so how much water do people have for irrigation? And that's becoming increasingly important as the climate is changing and precipitation patterns are changing, and people can no longer rely on the natural rain patterns to irrigate their crops.
And so what's the future of this?
It's uncertain. I think the future is...
That's so you know you're speaking to a scientist. When they don't know something, they'll say, it's uncertain. Everyone else says, I have the answer, whether or not they actually do. Yeah.
So the future is working with people from NASA and NOAA to get a better understanding of how we as humans are affecting the climate and how it's changing how those two are working together so that we can make smarter choices about how we use water.
Offline, we were talking about how much water it takes to make a bottle of water. Could you just share with us that?
Yeah, so when you buy a bottle of water, little PET bottle of water, it took twice as much water to make the bottle as you have in the bottle. And depending how the water was filtered, assuming it actually was filtered and it's not just a fake label, depending how the filtering was done, it took 3 to 9 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of that bottled water, which then goes into plastic bottles that took twice as much water to make as they hold.
General, let me ask you a question. Do you really foresee wars over water going forward? I mean, are your people who are still at the Pentagon, are there whole situation rooms where they're plotting what kind of war would occur in the presence of scarcity of water? Is that?
No, I mean, yeah, I mean.
Okay.
So it isn't the type of war it would be. It is a war, right? So
what you're saying is it's a strategic resource.
Absolutely.
Therefore, and
so I think there's a high likelihood, unless something changes, there will be serious conflict over water in not too distant future, 15, 30 years. Maybe before that. I think you have to make water a holistic issue. But in the Gaza, as we all know, that's the size of Washington, D.C., that's very structured. It's people are closed in, and water is of the essence. They live on the water, but they don't have a desal plant there, right? They get their water from Israel. And they're using so much water that in 2 years, the water, the aquifer is going to desalinate, and they won't have any water. Now, that's going to be a crisis, you know, in the making right there. And we talk about what
You see that coming already.
You see it coming. But I was just in Ethiopia a couple of weeks ago, and they're building a huge dam on the Nile. The Nile actually, you know, flows toward the Mediterranean, obviously, into Egypt. And it's a big issue with Egypt. I mean, they've threatened war over this thing because so they're going to have to accommodate how much are they going to take out, but but they're going to keep it for electricity actually. But they're stopping the water, and that's the future. I mean, that's what Israel's had an issue with the river, the Jordan River, and all that for a long time, and that's not so water wars are not. First of all, they're not new, but they could be exacerbated, I think.
So you say there'll be a catastrophe in 15 years. Why don't any of us have any hope or expectation that a clever person will show up and solve this problem so that water is no longer a strategic asset?
Well, there might be one widget, but there will be 9 billion people by the year 2030 that Chuck's talking about. And so there are a number of factors. One is that widget takes electricity to run. And with the technology we currently have to
Or sunlight.
Or sunlight. But you're going to make water for 9 billion people. You're going to make water to irrigate an area the size of the Central Valley or some of the areas where Tess works. You're going to need some serious power density to make that all happen. So our widgets today that can take the salt out of seawater consume a lot of electricity to do that. And guess what? It takes a lot of water to produce a lot of electricity. So getting the economics to where you're really making some economic sense and getting the water cycle to where it's making some sense to suck in seawater to turn out a gallon of fresh water. And then, oh, by the way, since I do have that ocean word in our agency title, what's left when you've sucked the salt out of seawater is a really dense, salty brine. Okay, that just became your waste stream. What do you do with that? Well, you could put it back in the big ocean where it came from, except all the things that live in the big ocean that 20% of the people depend on for food globally, they don't like really salty water like that. So there's the power density, there's the competing use of water for electricity and electricity to make water, there's the waste problem, and then there's just getting started improving some things to the appropriate scale and moving out on it. So one widget against 9 billion people is still a pretty tough proposition to scale.
So, because my naive thought is, there's water in the ground, I take out the water, I water the plant, and the plant uses some of it, but the rest goes in the soil, and doesn't it go back to the aquifer? And I pull out of the well, and I drink it, and then I pee later, and it goes back in. Where's the water going? I thought it was all just one cycle.
So that's what the farmers in India that I work with think. It's okay to overwater my field because the rest of it just goes back to the aquifer. But we have to remember the other thing that's happening, right? Evaporation.
But that goes to a cloud that then rains later.
Right, but the time that it takes the water to go back into the aquifer is longer than it takes you to pump it. And so...
So it's out of equilibrium.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's different.
And so there are aquifers that are in equilibrium and that we're pumping at a reasonable, sustainable rate, and those are fine. And then there's ones that we're pumping faster than recharge goes back in. We're actually pumping water that recharged in a previous ice age.
Whoa.
And it's an amazing thing because, I mean, you just can't get people to have consensus around the world. I mean, it's like in America, okay, we'll give up half our water for somebody else. I don't think so. I mean, you almost have to have, unfortunately, a crisis, I think.
The crisis would have to be, I turn on my tap and the water doesn't come.
Yeah, or you get real thirsty and you die, and...
yeah, that
would... But there are places that they spend their whole day trying to get water. I mean, and,
just to be clear, you can go a month without food, but you're dead in 10 days without water.
Right.
Is that about fair?
If you're lucky to go 10.
Yeah, if you're lucky, right.
So I guess my real question there, since there was a question embedded, what are we doing about all the cool things you guys are doing? I mean, really tremendously cool. I get fired up hearing about it to make life on Earth better.
Well, everything we do at NASA, we feel comes back to the Earth. whether it's through technology, whether it's through the direct research we do with our 19 satellites that we do with our partners at NOAA and our international partners to measure all these things to try to figure out what's happening on the Earth right now, because climate change is happening right now. There are streets in Florida that flood at high tide, mega drought in California. The Arctic ice is melting. Come on, people, what more do you need? Climate change is happening.
So the trick is, this has been principally a scientific conversation. It's, as you know, Chuck, just within the last not that many years, it began to be a national security conversation, and it's really only just starting to become an economic conversation. The great line that characterized this part of the issue to me was, guess who? Stephen Colbert, who said, hey, if my body is 60% water, how come I'm only 2% interested? So, and you know what? The reason is because it comes out of the wall, and it's essentially free to you right now.
Comes out
so
of the wall.
it's just it's the taken for granted routine. And since you only have 10 days to get seriously worried about it when you hit a wall, it's going to get really ugly when you hit a wall. This is not going to be sitting quietly in your living room until you pass away. This is going to fray society.
But strategically here, suppose there's water elsewhere in the world, and somehow we run out of water here. That becomes a strategic asset.
It's hard to even imagine the emotion of it, but I think all of us here would probably do something pretty drastic if we didn't have water and somebody else did. That's a terrible thing to think about. I mean, and that would be.
Yeah, but you're paid to think about that.
Well, and I think people do horrible things when they're pressured, and so again, I mean, this is one of those things where. We talked about energy a little bit and oil. You could probably work around that somehow. You could probably live, if it was totally cut off, wouldn't work very good. But if you start cutting off water, this is like Maslow's theory here. I want my air, I want my water, and then everything else after that's gravy, kind of.
Somewhere out there right now, there is a little girl. And in about 20 years, right about the time scale you're talking about, that we need someone to help solve these problems, she's going to be there. And she's going to her school library right now, and I guarantee you she is not getting a book about desal. All right? She isn't.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
And she's probably not going to be studying aquifers. She's not looking at resource utilization. And I know these things because I have kids and I've worked in their libraries. They're getting out books about black holes, which are just as esoteric as those other things, but kids love that. Right? So NASA plays a very important role for our country, inspiring people, inspiring kids. I don't think the movement is to get kids into space sciences. The movement is to get people thinking scientifically and appreciating science, appreciating engineering. And they don't need to be astronomers. They don't need to be space scientists, but they need to be educated people. That's the goal.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our panel.